Hi, this is Robert Shear with another edition of Shear Intelligence, where my guest is Ray McGovern, as it is every week on Tuesday. Two guys from the Bronx who went very different ways in relation to American society. Ray went into the CIA, and I went into opposition to the CIA as a journalist, or at least try to clarify what they're all about. He was there for 27 years, briefed three presidents, presidential administrations, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, and I wrote critically about all those things. And we're at an odd moment now where the world seems to be flying apart, but really communism seems almost incidental to it. Communism exists as a nationalist force, but the reason we're talking today about this is we're at a historic moment marking the 50th year of the fall of Saigon, the fall of the American war in Vietnam, the end of it. And at the time, it was seen as the most ignominious defeat in American history. We never had a defeat like that. There was great shock. And the prediction was this would embolden international communism and its most aggressive component, China. And this was going to be terrible. And in fact, quite the opposite happened. All the pundits were wrong. The media was wrong. The politicians were wrong. Or maybe they just lied to us. But they said you had to win in Vietnam, or the Vietnamese and the communists and the Chinese would be conquering us in San Diego. It was all garbage. And what happened was, with that defeat, and it's hardly ever mentioned, communist Vietnam and communist China went to war. And they went to war over borders, they went to war over their competing nationalism, and it came to a stalemate. So it was the exact opposite of what all the punditry would have predicted. And in fact, they've been quite competitive ever since, even though they're both communist countries. And they're arguing about, as they did back then, islands in the South China Sea. They're arguing about their border and so forth and so on. So communism turned out to be irrelevant. This was the great enemy. And the fact is, nationalism turned out to be strong, as it is throughout the world. And what is ironic right now is, with the relations between the United States and China at a true low point and a real fear of World War III and what have you, on this day of this 50th anniversary, Chinese communists are in communist Hanoi, Vietnam, and they're talking about how to make sense of the Trump tariffs, how to improve their own relationships, including military relations, where now Vietnam has a significant military it didn't have before in terms of ships or planes or anything, and how they can improve trade. And so, actually, ironically, Trump has brought these two communist countries back together again, whereas a victory in Vietnam threatened their alliance, and they've been quite tense. So, I'm talking to a guy who spent his life being an official expert in the CIA about communism and about Russia, about China, and about Vietnam. And I'm going to turn it over to him now. But what does this say about the word intelligence, about our foreign policy, that we could be so abysmally wrong about everything? And it's not as if there aren't consequences. 59,000 Americans lost their lives in that war, and somewhere between 4 and 6 million Indo-Chinese people, mostly innocent civilians. So this havoc, this mayhem, this death that we visited upon that part of the world, which we continue to visit elsewhere, was done in a totally irresponsible way, despite the best efforts of, quote, intelligence experts like Ray McGovern. So take it from there, Ray.
Well, Bob, it just shows that power, uh, the military industrial complex, and politics have a tendency to trump, pardon use of the word, anything else, in the first instance, truth. This hobgoblin of communism, it didn't exist to the extent that nationalism did, as you just said, but it existed in perceptions, in the perception of policymakers, and they used it, whether they believed it or not, to sell arms and to aggrandize themselves and their countries. Now, after World War II, for lots of reasons, there was this inordinate fear of communism that had to be rebuffed that rebuffed by arms. The Vietnamese were kind of what France was worried about. What we were worried about is the communists in France, and so we supported the French in this fool's errand of going into Vietnam and trying to do what the French couldn't do, actually that the Chinese couldn't do, that nobody could do. The Vietnamese are going to defend their country. So there are lots of lessons here, but the first and foremost one is that no matter how people at the working level of intelligence, no matter how they strive to say, well, look, this is not Russia and China uh, thinking that they have to go through Southeast Asia. This is Russia and China trying to contend for leadership within the international communist movement at the time by giving each other a bloody nose, saying, oh, you're not giving enough support for the North Vietnamese that are at war with imperialism. And that's the way it worked out. As a matter of fact, what you may not recall, Bob, but I know because I couldn't get it believed at first, the Chinese prevented the provision of U.S. of Soviet arms to Vietnam, not only by rail but other ways. They actually prevented Soviet aircraft from delivering arms to Vietnam. That's how intense that leadership. And the policymakers disregarded all that because it didn't coincide with their view of this thing, and we were suppressed. And the both
Let's stop right there, Ray, because now
yeah.
you shared a piece of information that really goes to the heart of the deception of the American people throughout the Cold War and up to the present day. Because the big lie here, as Orwell wrote about the need for an enemy, was we had international communism that was threatening the peace of the world. And on that basis, the US built this biggest empire the world has ever seen, and the most powerful empire the world has ever seen, at great cost, resources, lives, and so forth. And the lie was there was a unified international communism that was going to destroy the world. The fact is, there weren't two communist countries in the world that were easily at peace with each other. And we saw that with Yugoslavia, where again, you had a nationalist leader in Tito, as you had with Ho Chi Minh in China, as you had with Mao in Russia. All of these people were nationalists, even though they were communists. And so they ended up splintering. And Tito went his own independent way. And this was happening between Vietnam and China. Ho Chi Minh was a nationalist. We couldn't accept that. He was against the French. And he didn't want the Chinese back because they had occupied Vietnam for 1,000 years. They
Mhm.
had their own history. It's the last thing they wanted. We had to stick to the lie. That's what I want to get to. Yes, you were an intelligence officer of integrity and so forth. You had a friend, Sam Adams. I've talked to you about this at other times, who honestly reported on what was happening there, that this was the Vietnamese and they were fighting for their freedom. They were fighting for their independence. But the American people couldn't be told that. And the American media went along with the lies about this. That's really what the issue was. And it's interesting that we're having this discussion now because 50 years ago to the day, this was when the U.S. effort was defeated, the most ignominious defeat, as I said in there. And we predicted all sorts of terrible things. The fact is, Vietnam and Communist China didn't unite. They actually went to war. Vietnam didn't attack the United States. It attacked, or had battle with China over there. The irony is now, thanks to Donald Trump, and his raising tariffs everywhere on both the Vietnamese and the Chinese, but also on Taiwan, on and everyone else, he has actually brought communist Vietnam and communist China and non-communist Russia all back together in a way that they weren't in the Cold War under communism. And so that's what I want you to address is the folly of this, that here right now there's joint military maneuvers between Vietnam and China. There's trade agreements, really much more important than the military. And Donald Trump today had to speak with alarm about wait a minute, they're not supposed to be getting together. We wanted Apple to make its iPhones in Vietnam, not in China. So just let's address the folly of what is called intelligence in foreign policy that you were part of. This was absurd. And what you really know better than anyone is that the people that you were reporting to didn't want the truth. The truth was inconvenient.
Well, Bob, you mentioned the most important thing, and that is that China and Russia joined at the hip now. Okay, but you can't blame that on Trump. I
I
mean,
blame that on Biden.
Biden and and Clinton and the rest of them.
No,
They
but Biden in particular, the whole Russiagate, the whole madness that these people, people listening to this may not know, but Putin is the guy who defeated the communists in election. He's the one we backed, and he took Russia on a decidedly anti-communist course. That hasn't mattered at all for the madness of American foreign policy. It has no effect whatsoever.
now, Bob, in my view, the function of history is to kind of see whether this could ever happen again. Well, if you knew the facts, if you were well schooled in this, and Americans are not well schooled in this, you would say, well, this certainly this ignominious defeat couldn't happen again. I mean, like it has nothing to do with Ukraine. Give me a break. That's happening again. The Russians are now going to take over Europe. They're going to take Ukraine and then Poland and then the
Well, you're
Baltic.
talking about the madness of American propaganda.
Yeah, and then they're going to go. The next thing you know, they'll be on the English Channel. Now, who said that? Biden. Okay, and Blinken and Sullivan and the rest of them. Okay. Now, do Americans believe that? I dare say, because of the media's performance, many of them do. It's crazy. The Soviet Union fell apart. That happened in around 2000 or 1999. Okay, they don't want to take over anything. All they want is a secure Ukraine, which is not threatening them. So, what I'm saying here is there is a pattern here where people, for whatever reason, partly to build arms, to sell arms, to get rich, exaggerate these threats. And there is no threat. And there's no need for millions of people to die in Ukraine just to prove that. Okay. So I've seen what happened then. I was part of it. I saw how things were manipulated and how the American public was deceived not only by the administration but by the press. And I see it again in with respect to Ukraine. Uh, you can't really get the straight story from the major media. That's where we come in, Bob, you and I, and others. And if you thought that Putin wanted to take over Europe, well, you would be well advised to do the crazy things that the French and the English are trying to do, build up an army. But it's not the fact. All Putin wants is not the threat of having a well armed, NATO equipped Ukraine on his doorstep. And once that's realized, and, and, and actually, uh, Trump has pretty much acknowledged this explicitly. I can understand why Mr. Putin doesn't want NATO in Ukraine. Once that's recognized, maybe people could stop killing each other because they didn't need to kill each other in Vietnam and don't need to kill each other still in Ukraine.
Yeah, but you say we can set the record straight, but we really can't. I mean, I'm not going to stop trying. But the fact is, you've been making sense for a long time. You made sense when you were in the government, and there were others who were analysts at the CIA who knew this was all based on lies. For instance, the Gulf of Tonkin, which was the excuse for attacking Vietnam. You've written and talked about that. It was a lie. You knew it in real time. The presumption that these CPT boats were attacking American destroyers and all. But we didn't learn that for 20 years after. You knew it in real time. As a journalist, I only got the documents. I published that story in the LA Times, but it was 20 years after the fact. The people who were inside the Lyndon Johnson, not the Trump White House, the Lyndon Johnson, the Democratic Party, that was a Democrats' war, by the way, Vietnam. And they lied to us, and they lie all the time. And Russiagate, one thing about this election, the American public rejected Russiagate. I mean, the Democrats are still trying to say Trump is a Putin agent. He's going to make peace there because he's selling out. They're still warmongering on this issue, and the reality is war generally works as a way of getting you elected. And surely Trump is not opposed to that. He just raised the military budget to its highest point here, but in peacetime, so called. But the fact of the matter is, peace may break out in Ukraine, and the American public really don't like sticking with these wars for good reason. And so, why don't you tell us why you keep going and how you keep going? I know this concerns you. I know you feel some activism is necessary from time to time. We see some signs of people resisting, right, and objecting to the war spending, both in Gaza and Israel and here. Maybe we should talk a little bit about that. Do you feel people are finally listening to you or hearing these voices?
Well, on the one hand, we do have a weekly discussion that gets out and about. I'm talking twice with Judge Napolitano every week. There are other interviews. I have one every day. Now, whether that reaches the right people, I don't know, but it's better than it had been. I'll tell you, for the last couple of years, it's far better than it has been. Um, what concerns me is when people say, okay, right, you persuaded me. Now, what do we do? Well, it sounds sort of lame to go see a congressman or go to the Senate or write a letter. And some of my friends are doing what I also did when I lived in the Washington area, and that is put your body into it non-violently. And I have to commend the people at Travis Air Force Base last Wednesday, 12 of whom were arrested but not jailed, who put their body in and blocked the entrance to the base to those people loading bombs on aircraft to be delivered for genocide, with Israel as the implementer of the genocide. They stopped the traffic and they were arrested and they were treated rather sympathetically, not only by the police, but by some of the people in the cars who got out of the cars and said, look, we sympathize with you, but I need my job. This is my job. I need to load bombs to kill children. No, I didn't say that. We need to do our job. Okay. So this making people conscious of what they're doing is part of the problem. There are other air bases loading arms to hit women and children in Gaza. I suggest this is one thing we can do. Find out where they are. Now, if you're old like me, okay, you have this color hair, you have an advantage. What's that? Well, Americans, you know, young people demonstrating, getting beat up, or getting jail. That's I haven't commented to them. I say, but old people, Americans don't like old people to get beat up, Bob. Okay, so they're not gonna. Well, they're not gonna kill you. They haven't. I've been okay. Been there, done that. They're gonna beat you up a little bit, and then they put you in jail for a little while. But you owe it to the country. I'm reminded of Thoreau. Right? He's in jail. Okay, and Emerson comes by and said, "What are you doing there? What are you doing there in jail?" And Thoreau says, "What are you doing out there?" What was Thoreau protesting? The war to get Texas part of our country. Okay. Now, somebody said to me once at a lecture, "Well, Texas wouldn't be part of the country if Thoreau had his way." And I said, "So, from the sublime to the ridiculous, you can do these things. I would submit
Uh,
your patriotic duty."
yeah, but let me ask you, because it's such a wicked, messy stew right now. You can't. I mean, who are the good guys? I mean, everybody I know hates Trump, and he's doing a lot of real damage. He's destroying American universities. He's supporting genocide, just as Biden did before in Israel. Horrible. Uh, but there are some contradictions. You can't just say, as there were a lot of rallies recently on this last weekend, you know, stop Trump. But Mr. Trump has also made some steps towards peace. You know, God, I'll be denounced for suggesting that, but he's actually got a negotiator, one that, that's not Marco Rubio, right? And he's got a negotiator out there talking, even maybe about some peace in the Middle East, but certainly about Ukraine. Maybe that'll happen. It won't happen. But it's kind of pathetic that you can't just say bring back the Democrats. I mean, is Trump? I mean, it's really weird that maybe the chance for some peace in Europe, which is not unimportant after all, and we were provoking Russia here, which has as strong a nuclear force as we do, and I ask you, I mean, you must be confused. You've probably been a Democrat all your life. You probably thought they were at least the lesser evil, if not the good guys all the time. We're here to remember the Vietnam War 50 years ago. That was a Democrats' war. It was Richard Nixon who stopped it, basically. Richard Nixon, who escalated the war and, yes, killed a lot of
All
people, but he
right.
also went to China, met with Mao, and that's how the Vietnam War stopped. It wasn't the fact that the Democrats under Johnson changed it. Might Trump prove to be a Nixon?
Well,
I'm asking the one guy in the country who actually, from having eyeballed presidents, can provide some enlightenment on that. So go for it.
well, it's a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde situation. Uh, I can't even bear to think about what's happening in Gaza because I never thought I would be living in a country that pretended to be a democracy and is doing genocide, is enabling genocide. That's where those bombs are going. That I talked about at Travis. They're
And
going.
didn't that happen under Biden also?
Yeah, it did, but I'm not. I'm not really talking out of politics. I'm talking about what America is doing
No,
here.
no, no. But I'm asking you a question of choice in politics because we had these demonstrations just now in the weekend, and it was all about stop Trump, which I'm all for doing, and he's doing a lot of damage and scaring people like crazy and arresting people and deporting people, so forth. But I'm also asking you, where is hope here? Uh, how do we stop this military machine that seems to go on, whether it's Democrats or Republicans?
Well, you have to discriminate, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Now, what I'm saying here is that Trump derangement syndrome is really a pernicious thing. Okay. How did it work out? Well, from people I know who have been directors or deputy directors of intelligence agencies, they were persuaded, 51 of them, to sign that statement saying Hunter Biden's laptop was a Russian intelligence disinformation operation 2 weeks before the election in 2020. Now that's the worst. That's when you have a party, the Democrats in this case, Blinken himself. Uh, there's testimony that he asked former acting director of the CIA to get that false information out. And I know those guys. I worked with them. I worked with one in particular whom I wrote an email to. I said, how the hell did your name get up there toward the top of that
You
list?
said 2020. You meant 2024. No.
No, this is 2020,
Oh,
the
20.
election where Biden won.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying that he would have lost because of it if
Oh,
this came out, but it was certainly an influential factor. It was right before the final debate. So what
right.
happened was I asked my friend, I said, your name is on there. Were you deceived? And he wrote back, and he said, I hate Trump so much and what he stands for that doesn't matter whether it's truth or not. Now, this guy happens to be one guy who I know personally helped prevent a war against Iran. The guy has got integrity up the gazoo, but on this one, he was deceived by uh, Trump derangement syndrome. So what I'm saying is people need to get rid of that. Okay. They got to recognize that there's a Dr. Jekyll and a Mr. Hyde, and that on Ukraine, there can be peace. And my opinion is there will be peace if Trump can overcome internal opposition because Putin is willing to deal. He's got a really strong hand, of course, and Trump has got to realize he's got a very weak hand, but that can be done. And both of them want peace in that part of the world. I'm convinced. Take it from me. I've been an analyst for 50 years. Okay. Now, the other part of it, the stuff in Gaza, is just so reprehensible that I don't even want to think about it. And maybe if there's peace in Ukraine, maybe there will be people enough in our country say, well, maybe we should stop letting Israel run our policy toward the Middle East. Maybe there should be peace there. And when I talk about, I talked to somebody, went into the Senate to talk to their senator about our slavish devotion to Israel. And I said, come on, you know, the Israelis would never accept statehood in the United States. And he said, well, that'd be good. No, that wouldn't be good. They wouldn't accept it. You know why? And he said, no, why? Because then they would only have two senators. Right now, they have the best Senate that money can buy, the same as the House of Representatives. And that's no way to run a country on our part. We need to speak truth to Trump, not only on Ukraine, but on Gaza and on Lebanon.
But
And
we're gonna. I want to wrap this up for our weekly discussion, but I want to take advantage of your wisdom as somebody who worked within the war machine, but also has worked very effectively and courageously outside of it. Where, where is optimism? Where is sanity? Right now, yes, I agree with you. Trump is, I mean, he's deporting people and arresting people for daring to speak honestly about what's going on in Gaza. He's destroying American universities. He's threatening chaos in the world with these tariffs. I'm not here to play, apologize for Trump in any way, but it's depressing when you consider how did we get here? We got here because it was enabled by the Democrats. And remember, the hook we have here for the beginning of the show was this disastrous war in Vietnam, which sealed the Cold War for decades, cost the lives of a lot of people. And then you take Gaza, which you're throwing back as opposed to Ukraine. Well, Gaza's been a Democratic Party war. They're the ones who went along with Netanyahu on this. Yes, there was a significant attack by Hamas. There were ways to deal with that. It certainly didn't mean to go over there as Biden did and to give the green light to Netanyahu to do whatever he wants and forget about the Palestinians, who, after all, were reduced to this enclave in Gaza under the most, miserable circumstance by a policy which we accepted. So I'm asking you really to tie the two together. You know, yes, you don't want Trump derangement syndrome, but Trump is quite dangerous, clearly. Are we caught between this rock and a hard place forever? Or is it getting worse? What's going to happen here?
yeah.
And yes, if your pitch is people should protest and demonstrate, yes, you made your point. But really, I'm asking you as an analyst, and looking at any country in the world, but looking at our own, are we doomed to some horrible disaster here?
No, I have more faith in the American people than to say we're doomed. I do think we have to become more nonpartisan. Uh, Bob, for you to blame our policy toward Israel and the Middle East on the Democrats, just that ain't so. It's both parties, and you know that,
Oh
okay?
yeah, for
And
sure.
you know how we got into Israel. How we got into Iraq, how we attacked. That was mostly Israelis urging, and I can prove that. And, with respect to Gaza, it was under Bush, Cheney, and Condoleezza Rice, bless her heart, Secretary of State, who said, hey, let's have elections in Gaza and the West Bank. They did, and Hamas won hands down. It's all portrayed in a wonderful article in Vanity Fair by a fellow named David Rose, written in 2008. Look it up. He explains the whole thing. Hamas won, and then the CIA sponsored a revolt trying to dislodge Hamas. It didn't work. So we have to be nonpartisan about this. Both parties are guilty as hell of bowing to Israel's diktat. Now, the way forward, my God, well, we can't lose sight of the fact that our first founders, for God's sake, they were in a minority. They had a lot of fighting to do, and Tom Paine wrote that wonderful little essay saying, "Look, now's the time to try men's souls. We have to be winter soldiers, not summer soldiers." And this will require a little pain on our part. We may get beat up. We may be put in jail a little bit, but we have to take action. We can't just mouth history and suggestions as to what letters we can write. And that's why I say these. I've been in New Mexico at that drone air base. We've demonstrated there. You have to prick the consciences of those people who are for a salary killing people in across the world.
Right, but
Work on it, and I'm convinced we will succeed. It's just that it won't be as quickly as you and I want, Bob.
well, the point is, it won't be as quickly as maybe the world requires to save itself. I don't want to drop this thread just for a minute. We always talk about keeping these shows shorter, but I do think we're into something really significant here, because we had these demonstrations this weekend, and I applaud Bernie Sanders, and I'll even say AOC played a good role in organizing people, and there were a lot of demonstrations and a lot of people speaking out. But they soft pedaled. They soft pedaled. Well, actually, they even soft pedaled Gaza. They certainly soft pedaled the role of the Democrats in any of this, and you can't escape that. The condition of our democracy is, it's basically, if we got any chance at all, it's with these elections. And we can't minimize the horror of having basically two war parties, you know. And yeah, maybe Republicans are worse. Certainly, Trump is more unstable, but not, you know, it's. I want you to address that because you made a call for activism, and yes, activism is good. But I was at this rally here. I listened to a lot of it, and what was all, hey, let's throw this guy Trump out, which is certainly admirable. But who are you bringing back in? Adam Schiff, for example, who's our senator in California. He's the guy that bought into the whole Russiagate thing. He's the guy who wanted to, push us into even a higher level of fighting and war. Yes, so you don't want to drop these bombs. And by the way, he's certainly not hesitant to give Netanyahu a blank check. So was Schumer. So I really, I applaud your activism, Ray, and it's better that you do that than still be working at the CIA. But the fact of the matter is, you know, uh, we're in need of some profound thinking about our circumstance, our politics, our choice. And with all hats off to the people demonstrating in air base and so forth, if all they're saying is get rid of this bum, Trump, and then bring the other guys back, that's not going to cut it.
Right. Well, Bob, that's where you're misled. They're not about that. They're about the bombs that are going to Israel. If they're Democrats or Republicans, it doesn't really matter. Okay.
Yeah,
Now,
let me stipulate so we don't waste any time. I applaud those people,
right.
and I agree with them, and I applaud your going to that. But it's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking is how do we educate the American public to this whole obsession with our enemies and our right to do anything we want? And I bring it back to Vietnam, and let's wrap this up. But the fact of the matter is, we didn't learn the lesson of Vietnam. The war was unnecessary, and you and I had different relations to it. I actually went to Vietnam as a journalist. I went quite early and I went a whole bunch of times. I went north and south. I went to Cambodia and everything else. I went after the war also, and all I see is a continuation of the madness that drove us at that time. And you're right, it's bipartisan, but how do we break through this? How do we get people, whether they're highly educated, as were your colleagues in the CIA, or politicians who've gone to some of our fanciest schools, how do we get them to start using some common sense and some respect for fact and truth and logic in discussing this? Because would you agree with me that we're in as mad, ridiculous, nightmarish a situation in our politics internationally as we've ever been?
Yeah, well, we are, Bob. And the first solution would be not to let anybody who goes to those fancy colleges get a position of power in the country. Look at them. Blinken, look at it. Sullivan, the best and the brightest. McGeorge Bundy, who I mentioned before, he was dean of Harvard College, for God's sake. He
Oh,
wasn't.
McNamara was a whiz kid. He was
Yeah.
one of the smartest
So,
guys. Yeah.
so we don't want any whiskers. We don't want any. Well, okay, we can't ban them for God's sake, but you got to have somebody with some life experience. Now, in a more serious vein, my patron, as you know, is Daniel Berrigan, and he famously said, the difference between doing something and doing nothing is everything. Now, there's no one size fits all description for what people can do. My recommendation, and I've seen it work, is you get some, maybe three or four, five people, no more than five, okay? And you make sure there's at least one woman in that little circle. You get together with them every week and you share and you get to know each other. And then after 6 months, you'll find that when one of them says, "Look, I'm going to go do this, will you support it?" And the other say yes, then you have not only support, you have accountability, because the next week when they come back and say, "Did you do that?" and you realize. So each little group gets to do what they discern is their little role in life. It's no universal solution. That's my strong recommendation, but don't do nothing, okay? Because the difference between doing something and doing nothing is everything, and everything is what counts at this particular
All right.
juncture in time.
Well, I'll concede the wisdom of Daniel Berrigan and Ray McGovern, and the courage. I'm not denying that. And I saw you. I saw a video of you wrestle to the ground in one of your activist moments. So my hats off to you. But we also have to get clear about what all this propaganda stuff that we live with every hour of every day about who the enemy is. And like I say, I want to end by noting this is 50 years after this horrible war in Vietnam and Southeast Asia, got so many millions of people killed, and now they're getting together, Vietnam, China, and here's the United States wants to divide them or wants one to fight the other or join with us. So we're back in the same madness. Just depressing, but we have to take account of the times we live in and respond accordingly. And I want to thank uh, Joshua Shear for being the producer of these shows, Diego Ramos for uh, running, managing editor of SharePost, for posting these, Max Jones who does the video. I want to thank and Integrity Media, Len Goodman, for providing some funding for this, and the JKW Foundation in memory of Gene Stein, fiercely independent writer, for doing likewise. See you next week with another edition of Sheer Intelligence.